The Pirate and the Mapmaker. Written by Tasha Nerys. Narrated by Angela Clark. Chapter 1. The Taking of Windmere. Elara knew the harbor by sound before she knew it by sight. In the attic room above her father's chart shop, Windmere's morning announced itself in pieces. Gulls arguing over fish guts, cart wheels clattering on cobbles, sailors singing off-key as if bravado could tie the sea down and keep it from wandering. She drew those sounds into her lungs with the salt and ink and old vellum, then bent again to her map. A blue wash bled into the paper where she dabbed the curve of a current, a fingertips nudge turning it from guess to guidance. The attic was a tangle of light and useful clutter, compasses, dividers, coils of twine, a cracked hourglass that still kept a stubborn kind of time. The window framed a slice of sky already wearing heat. Windmere sweltered in late summer like a cat in a sunbeam, lazy until a storm rolled in to rouse it. "Too shallow there," Elara murmured, tapping the sheet where she'd sketched coral teeth just beneath the surface. "You bite, don't you? You look harmless, but you bite." She marked the reef's pale ridge and added a warning note in her neat, cramped script. "Soundings deceptive. Surge at ebb." It wasn't magic. It was listening. The sea told the truth if someone bothered to hear it. Downstairs, the bell over the shop door rang twice, the polite way sailors came in when they didn't intend trouble. Her father's voice floated up, thick with sleep and kindness. "Aye, we're open. Mind the step. We've lost more men to that splinter than to the storm last week." Elara smiled, then set her quill aside to rinse. When she leaned from the dormer to let the breeze dry the page, the docks spread out like a chessboard in motion, masts pricking the sky, black sails here and there among the honest brown, barrels rolled shoulder to shoulder, buoys darting like fish between legs and cargo. The sea beyond the breakwater lay glass flat, but a line at the horizon already looked wrong to her. Too white, too soon. Squall by dusk, likely. She'd mention it to Father at dinner. The bell rang a third time. Not polite, hard. Her father's greeting cut short. Elara's stomach went tight. Windmere had its predators, same as any sea town. Press gangs, taxmen with more appetite than law, and sometimes, rarely, the kind of trouble that darkened an entire doorway. Boots took the stairs as if they owned them. 2 sets, a third that didn't bother climbing because it didn't have to. "Scholar!" a voice called from the bottom of the attic steps. Low, amused. The word turned into a smile with teeth in it. "Come down!" Elara didn't move at first. She laid one palm flat on the map to steady herself, the paper cool under her hand. Scholar. No one called her that but Father. She glanced at the trap door where the ladder hooked. A shadow filled the square of light below it, then shifted as if the man attached to it had tilted his head and found the notion of patience entertaining but unnecessary. "I've got clients," her father said mildly. He sounded like a man persuading a dog to drop a shoe. "Come back tomorrow." A second voice rasped something curt and ugly. A shelf rattled. Elara climbed down. The shop's main room was a long rectangle with a counter at the far end and drawers stacked to the ceiling behind it, each with a brass plate naming the coast it held. Rimfire Isles, Banefall Shoals, Pearlback Chain. It smelled of tar and lemon peel and the faint iron of old blood. 2 men stood between the cabinets and the door. The closest leaned on the counter like he'd built it. He had sunburned skin gone to bronze and a mouth that knew how to mock without moving. His coat was salt-stained black, his shirt plain, open at the throat. Rope-burned circles marked his wrists where lines had once tried to claim him and failed. His eyes were a trick of the light. They read gray at first, and then went seawater green when she looked straight into them. He stood easy, but there was nothing easy about him. "Captain Rhys Calderon," her father said, carefully neutral. "You're not on the harbor lists." "Imagine that," the man replied lightly, and those gray-green eyes flicked from the older man to Elara and stayed. "Scholar." No leer, no appraising sweep, just a plain, assessing look, as if he'd read a map and found the part that mattered. "Mapmaker," Elara corrected, because it felt like armor. "Rhys," he offered, as if names were coins. "You're coming with me." Her father stepped between them. He did not look like much, soft around the middle, white in the beard. But he'd sailed 40 years before Windmere ever called him shopkeep, and the sea had left a stubborn line in him. "She'll do no such thing." Rhys watched Elara instead of the older man, the way a hunter watched the path where prey would be, not where it was. "You chart currents that aren't charted. You mark reefs that don't show until the tide decides to be cruel. 3 captains under oath claim your maps were right when theirs were wrong." Elara's cheeks went hot. "I listened." "To what?" he asked. "The sea." It was absurd to say, but honest. She lifted her chin anyway. The second man by the door, broad shoulders, broken nose, a scar that bent his smile, snorted. "She listens. That's what we're missing all these years, then." Rhys's hand flicked, a quiet admonition without turning. The broad-shouldered man subsided like a wave after a rock. "The Isle of Sirens," Rhys said. He didn't whisper the name like most men did. He set it on the counter like a blade. "You've drawn it." Elara laughed once, a sound like a cough. "No one's drawn it. We've guessed where fools swear it must be. We make beautiful myths on paper and sell them to captains who want something larger than their own lives." "And do you want something larger than yours?" Rhys asked, mild as a tide. Her father's hand found her wrist and squeezed, a warning and a plea. "Elara, upstairs." Rhys straightened, the easy curve leaving his spine. Power flowed off him like heat from Blackstone. "Here's the choice, scholar. Come willingly and chart the edge of the world, or I burn this place down and pluck the ashes from what I need." The room went very quiet. Outside, the harbor laughed and bargained and sang, as if another world ran just beyond the door where nothing terrible ever happened. "You won't touch my shop," her father said. He lied like a sailor, brave and thin. "The harbor guard likes coin," the scarred man said cheerfully. "We have coin." Elara took a breath, then another. She looked at the drawers behind the counter, the lives she and her father had tucked into paper. Old storms, new channels, safe harbors, false ones. She had imagined a long, tidy life here, a husband who wouldn't mind ink on the sheets, a child taught to read wind by taste. She had imagined dying in this room with the window open and a gull perched on the sill, peering in like a rude priest. A line at the horizon was whitening by the minute. Squall by dusk. She set her hand on the counter and felt the wood. solid and familiar under her palm. "If I go," she said, "you leave my father and this shop untouched. You pay for my time." Rhys's mouth tipped as if she'd told a joke he appreciated. "Time?" he said softly. "That's dearer than coin, Mapmaker." "Then pay dear," she said, surprising herself with how firm she sounded. He studied her like a coast he meant to land on in fog. Then he nodded once. "Done." "On paper," she countered. The scarred man choked. Rhys's brows lifted. "You want a contract?" "I want a map," Elara said. "A way back." For a heartbeat, something unguarded eased into his face. Some flash of respect, or maybe recognition. Then it was gone. "Rook," he said to the scarred man, "bring ink." They wrote it out together on the back of a discarded chart. Safe passage promised. The shop untouchable. A share of salvage should they find any. Her return upon completion. Rhys signed with a clean hand and a pirate's flourish. The ink looked very black on the old paper. Her father leaned close when Rhys stepped aside to sand the page. "You don't have to," he whispered. "If I don't," she whispered back, "he burns what we've built because I was afraid to try. I can find my way home again." "You're my home," he said, voice breaking. She kissed his weathered cheek. "Then I'll carry you with me." When she turned, Rhys was watching them both, the polite way men watched grief they had no right to touch. "Pack," he said gently, as if to soften the order. "We sail on the turn of the tide." Elara climbed the attic ladder one last time and gathered what a life became when you made it small. Her best compass, the one with the nick in the brass where she'd dropped it at 12. A roll of vellum, 3 sticks of blue pigment, her mother's thimble, though she never sewed, a coil of twine with a knot she'd tied on the day Father taught her the difference between a reef knot and a granny. She took the new map, edges damp from the drying, and slid it into a leather tube. A gull peered in the window and cocked its head at her. "I know," she said. "Me too." When she came down, the street outside had changed color. Not literally, still the same sun-bleached planks and tar-black boots, but in tone, as if someone had turned the key on a music box and slowed the tune. Men paused to look when Rhys stepped into the light. Black sails carried rumors into port as efficiently as fish and letters. A ripple went through the crowd. The sea serpent waited at berth 17, a sleek thing with a hull that ate shadow and a figurehead like a serpent curling around a moon. Elara's feet stuck on the dock for a breath. She had never walked onto a ship without choosing it. Choice felt different when it was given with a blade. Rhys offered his hand. She didn't take it. She stepped aboard herself, the deck rising a little under her, as if the ship had bowed to sniff her. "Welcome home, scholar," the scarred man, Rook, she guessed, said, then laughed at his own joke. Elara looked past him to the horizon. The line of white had sharpened, the air gone metallic in her mouth. She tasted rain before it thought to fall. "If we leave now," she said, "we'll meet a squall at the breakwater. You'll want to tack north of the marker buoy. The current pushes sly to the south before the wind catches." Rook's grin faltered. "She tastes the weather, then." Rhys's eyes, gray-green, never one color long enough to trust, found hers. "We'll tack north," he said, not to humor her, to obey her. And he lifted his hand and gave an order, and the ship peeled from the dock like a knife sliding free of a sheath. Wind caught, lines sang. Men moved to their stations with an economy that reminded Elara of the tiny way numbers balanced when you did the sums right. The harbor mouth widened. The city shrank. Her father was a figure at the end of the dock, small and stubborn, one hand lifted like a blessing or a warning. Elara drew the strap of her leather tube across her chest and set her feet to the rhythm of the deck. She felt it then, the tiniest startle under her ribs, as if a bird had woken and realized the cage door was open. Rhys came to stand beside her at the rail, not touching. "You'll earn your coin, scholar," he said, voice low beneath the snap of sail. "We're going where maps pretend to go and lie about it later." "And if we don't come back?" she asked before she could help herself. He looked at the horizon the way some men looked at a lover, jaw set against wanting too much. "Then at least we went." A child might have called the moment magic. Elara, who believed in soundings and wind shifts and the way a gull's wings told you more than a priest ever would, called it choice. She took a breath that tasted like brine and thunder. The white line at the horizon hurried toward them, all bright teeth and joy. "North of the marker," she said again, and Rhys's mouth slanted in that almost smile, like a compass finding true. "North it is." Behind them, Windmere's bell told the hour. Before them, the sea lifted its voice. And between the two, on a ship named for a serpent that ate its own tail, a Mapmaker stepped past the edge of her neat life and found the first curve of a larger one. Chapter 2. Salt, Ink, and the Ship's Heart. The sea serpent taught by motion. She did not lecture. She heaved, creaked, leaned, and expected you to learn the lesson. By midday of the first full day at sea, Elara's neat land legs had been traded for a sailor's wider stance, knees loose, toes instinctively taking the curve of the deck. She had not been sick. Her father's blood was stubborn in her. But the ship still made demands. Bruises bloomed along her hips where a swinging line had kissed too hard. The pads of her fingers wore a shine from rope. Rook, the scarred man who laughed first and apologized never, walked her through the living of it. "Lines, scholar," he said, sweeping a hand at the forest of hemp above. "Don't say ropes. Ropes come aboard for naming. Once named, they're lines. That there's the halyard. There's the sheet. Don't ever call a sheet a rope unless you want to fly." "I don't want to fly," Elara said dryly, eyes on the belaying pins he tapped, committing their order to her head like a song. "Oh, you do," he grinned, not unkind. "Just not that way." He showed her where not to stand when the boom swung, how to mind her fingers near blocks, which hatches were friendly and which ate ankles. He thumped the deck with the heel of his palm. "She's fast. You treat her proper, she'll whisper the next gust to you afore it's born." "I listen," Elara said, more to herself than him. "Aye," he snorted. "So I'm told." They gave her a berth. A narrow hammock hung in a corner of the mid-deck cabin that the crew called the book room, because it was where the ledgers and manifests slept. A shelf received her leather tube. A peg took her coat. A salt-stained curtain gave the suggestion of privacy, which felt almost like kindness. "You'll chart in the captain's room," Rook said, jerking his chin toward the stern. "When he says. Else you help where you can and keep out the way when you can't." Keeping out of the way was harder than helping. Elara's hands itched for tasks that made sense. She coiled lines with her new, small grace. passing them to hands that took them without thanks, but also without shove. She carried water. She learned the cook's name, Miri, sharp with her knives, soft with her bread, and the helmsman's, old Shan, who didn't look old until he smiled and his years showed like sun lines in his cheeks. She learned the code posted by the galley door in Rook's cramped hand. No stealing from ship or shipmates. No knives for sport. No hands on another without their yes. Shore trouble stays ashore. Storm orders are law. She traced the letters with her gaze and felt some private muscle unclench. There were worse places to be a woman than Windmere's lanes. There were better, too. Perhaps this would be one of them. The crew, for their part, watched and weighed. Men with their hair bleached to straw by salt. 2 siblings who moved like mirrored cats and claimed to be from a place Elara had only seen in stories where the islands grew teeth. They called her scholar as if it were her shadow. The word held tease, but less malice than she'd feared. A degree less, enough to breathe around. In the late afternoon, Rhys sent for her. The captain's cabin was larger than she expected and plainer. No velvet, no gilt. A chart table dominated the space, scarred from a lifetime of elbows and ink. Its map weights were ordinary rocks smoothed by waves, not clever-carved whales or brass anchors. The stern windows were open to a square of blue that made the narrow room feel like a throat opening for air. A cot nestled to the side, neatly made. On a peg above it hung a coat heavier than the day's heat wanted, and a length of tarred line coiled into obedience. Rhys stood over the table with his palm flattened on a chart that had too much legend and not enough coastline. "You're early," he said without looking up. "You said now," Elara answered. "That was for everyone else." His mouth tipped. Then he pointed with his chin at the stool opposite. "Sit." She did, setting her tube beside her, her knees careful not to bump the table. He slid the rumor map toward her. The ink shimmered in the light like fish. In the center, a suggestive swirl named Siren's Reach, with curlicues of notes around it. Beware singing. Northern current treacherous. Treasure where the sea swallows the sun. It was beautiful. It was useless. Elara kept her face neutral. "You think it's foolish," Rhys said, as if amusement were a flavor and he'd just tasted it again. "I think it's hopeful," she said, choosing soft truth. "There's no scale, no soundings, no charts within charts." Her finger tapped the edge of a penned whirlpool. "That current here looks like someone's fear of being pulled under, not the pull itself." He bent closer, not to argue, but to see what she saw. "Show me." Elara unrolled one of her vellum blanks, the good stuff that kept ink honest. Rhys's hand reached automatically for a map weight that wasn't there, and she watched him catch the reflex and replace it with a rock from his collection, fingers never quite resting with ease. Something in that trait, habit fighting new exigence, felt familiar. She knew the shape of it in her own bones. She set her compass foot gently, did not pierce. She drew arcs that weren't circles so much as the idea of them, measured by remembered wind and the shape of stories sailors hadn't known they were telling when they spoke. She marked sightings with little crosses, each cross a voice in her father's shop. "Saw silver light to starboard. Heard music like glass. Shoal where nothing should be." She ignored the drama and chased repetition. Rhys watched. He did not fidget, did not fill silence with command or anecdote. His presence felt like a weather system outside the window. There, undeniable, but not yet raining. You taste the weather? He said finally. I listen, Elara said, because there was no second truth that fit her mouth better. Birds, the way your men swear. He laughed, quick and clean. Rook's oaths to predict a gale. Everyone's do, she returned, and he tilted his head at that, looking at her with something that wasn't quite respect yet, but had stepped out of its room to peer. They worked. He asked questions that proved he'd read charts and sailed by them rather than merely pointed at places and ordered the wind to agree. She answered without apology, pointing once to a line he'd drawn. If you cut that close to the shoal, you'll save an hour and pay in a haul and 2 men. 3, he corrected mildly, if Rook's the one on the bow. You jest. I count. She looked up at him then, properly. The gray-green of his gaze was like the sea in uncertain light, a promise that could warm, could drown. He wore command like the coat on the peg, useful, fitted, but not made for preening. Up close, the rope burn scars around his wrists were not symmetrical. He wasn't vain enough to have made them a matched set. Why did you offer coin for my time? The question slipped out without permission. You could have taken what you wanted. I did, he said simply, and then I paid. That's not how taking works, she said. It is, if I mean to keep taking from you. He was not flirting. He was stating logistics. Somehow that landed warmer than honey would have. A shadow fell across the table. The ship leaned. Elara felt the nudge before the lantern swayed. She licked her lips, tasting iron on the air. Wind's veering north, she said. You'll want the mizzen trimmed or she'll round up on you. Rhys was already moving, the door knocked back by his shoulder before the last word left her mouth. Rook, he thundered, and the shape of his voice changed when he gave orders. Less man, more mast. The crew moving in response as if to a tide. Elara followed him to the companionway and stayed out of the rush, watching the ship shiver into a different set of muscles. Lines paid out and were hauled taut, feet braced, shoulders leaned, the sea serpent answering with a pleased hum. Old Shan's hands were on the wheel, the tendons in his forearms writ like rope under weather-browned skin. North a point, Rhys called. Aye, came the answer, and the bow swung like a dancer changing partners, the sail belly smoothing, the heel easing. Rook whistled low when it was done, hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. He flicked water from his fingers at Elara in a gesture that might have been benediction if he were a kinder man. You felt that wind shift afore my nose did. She listened, old Shan corrected, grinning around his missing teeth. Rhys's gaze flicked to his helmsman and then to her. Next time, scholar, he said to Elara. You don't ask, you tell me. Orders? Rook teased. From the attic, mouse. From the Mapmaker, Rhys said. And that shut a few mouths and opened a few eyes. It wasn't miracle what came after. It was work. It was the kind that scrubbed grief from the corners of your mind by filling your hands. Elara was not above swabbing the deck when Miri snapped and pointed, nor above hauling the net a boy named Kit had tangled so fiercely it looked like it had plans. She took her turn at the pump, at the mess line, at the hourglass on the quarterdeck, calling time while the watch changed. She dozed in her hammock in snatches, waking to the rhythm of the bell and the hum of the hull and the intimate squeak of hemp in cleats. They tested her mercy. They always would. Twice she found her tools moved, the compass buried under old manifests, the vellum replaced with scrap so thin it bled through. Twice she found them back where they belonged without complaint lodged or culprit named, because she hadn't complained, and because some invisible line had been sketched by a voice that crew obeyed. And once, because There is always one. Lesh, a thin man whose laugh came a second too late, leaned too close while she bent over a chart and breathed weather into her hair. "Here, anything in this, scholar?" Before Elara could decide which answer would leave the least blood on the paper, a hand hooked the back of Lesh's collar and hauled him away as if he were a mislaid sack of flour. Rhys didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Code says no hands." "Weren't hands," Lesh muttered, braver than he was smart. Rhys's smile showed 0 teeth and all promise. "I can upgrade it." Lesh found a different corner of the ship to be useless in. Rook rolled a knife across his knuckles idly and didn't look at Elara, which felt like the most respectful thing anyone had done all day. At twilight, when the day burned down to a rim of copper and the white line of yesterday's squall had long since spent itself on some other ship, Rhys sent for her again. Lantern light made the chart table a small island of gold in the quiet cabin. He had a battered star map rolled out this time, the constellations inked with the stubborn confidence of someone centuries dead who'd still been sure of the sky. "We'll lose land references before week's end," he said, tapping the margin where the rimfire isles fell away to blue. "Then it's stars and prayer. I'd rather the first than the second." "Prayer is the sea's joke," Elara said without thinking, and then flushed. "Sorry." "No, keep that," he mused. "It suits you." She bent to the sky and the old names her father had taught in winter when the wind made the shutters rattle. The fiddler, the net, the old wolf with his jaws full of light. Rhys watched her measure angles with fingers and thought. His edges were quieter at this hour. He had taken off the day's command like a stiff shirt and set it, unworn, across the back of a chair. "You refused my hand on the dock," he said suddenly. Elara's quill paused. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I could step aboard myself." Then, because the truth was a habit she wanted to keep, she added, "Because I thought if you touched me first, you would decide how to hold me thereafter." Rhys was very still for a beat that felt like 2. The ship creaked around them, a timber's yawn. "Fair," he said softly. "Keep your footing then. Tell me when you need my hand, and I'll give it. Or not." Elara swallowed. She did not thank him. Thanks would make the offer smaller than it was. She marked 3 potential routes upon the ancient starfield. One bold, shaving weeks and promising shipwreck. One cautious, long and honest. One in between that might allow a man to live and still feel he'd chased myth properly. Rhys stood and crossed to the window while she drew, his shoulder filling the square of night. The sea beyond breathed, the sound of it like a chest deciding to rise again after a held breath. "Why the sirens?" she asked finally, because the map demanded more than coordinates. It demanded the intention to match them. "There are easier treasures, less sung about, more likely to be real." He didn't answer right away. She could hear the fabric of his sleeve rasp as his hand flexed on the sill. "A thing can be sung about and real," he said at last. "Can it?" she said. Not as a scoff. "It can," he said. But he said it like a man remembering the exact shape of a wound. She didn't push. He would answer when the sea asked him first, and she only second. That felt right. A partnership with water between them, not a bridge burned before it was built. When she had finished with the sky, she cleaned her quill carefully, wiped it against a rag that had once been a shirt, and wore the ghost of a man's shoulders. She put the star map back into the roll, weighted it with a stone that fit her palm like a thought you'd had before. Rhys moved from the window and set his hand lightly on the vellum where her middle route cut a clean grace through blue. "Here," he said. "We make for here. We sail to rumor. We anchor in proof." She met his eyes. "And if there's no anchorage?" "Then we keep sailing," he said, and managed to make it sound less like stubbornness and more like a virtue that held a man together when nothing else would. On her way back to her hammock, Elara paused at the top of the companionway and let the night wash her. The deck murmured in its sleep. The sails sighed. Old Shan hummed a tune so old it had no words left. Stars crowded the sky with gossip. She breathed in salt and lamp smoke and the faint sweetness of Miri's late bread. Somewhere below, Rook laughed softly at something only he found funny. Somewhere above, a gull wheeled, late to roost. She pressed her palm to the nearest timber and felt the ship's slow, deep answer, the thud of her heart wrapped in oak and iron. "All right," she told the sea serpent, as if this were a conversation they would continue for a long time. "I'll listen. You carry. Let's not drop each other." The wood under her hand warmed, which meant nothing and everything. Elara smiled into the dark and went to sleep with ink on her fingers and salt dried in the crease of her elbow, the chart of the night sky still unrolling behind her eyes. In the morning, the wind would cut in from a different quarter. The crew would bicker about knots. Rhys would be infuriating on purpose to see what came loose in her. And somewhere ahead, the water would begin to wear a light that wasn't light. And the music, if music it was, would ride the backs of waves. But for now, the ship breathed. Elara matched it. Between breaths, a life she had not meant to live began to fit. Chapter 3. The First Storm. The morning broke so clean, Elara almost didn't trust it. The horizon wore a hard blue edge, the kind that looked like a promise if you were foolish, and like a warning if you'd ever listened to the sea tell a joke at your expense. By second bell, gulls had turned back for land, and the wind had lost its patience, gusting in sharp little cuffs instead of the easy breaths of yesterday. The sea serpent shouldered them with feline grace. But every so often, Elara felt a nervous twitch under the deck, as if the ship remembered things men didn't. Old Shan's hands rode the wheel like he was persuading it, not forcing. "Stormy temper on her today," he said, squinting into light that had started to go wrong. "Can't tell if she means it." "She means it," Elara said absently, mouth tasting metal. "And something else. There's a set in the water pushing west, stronger than it should be." Rook sauntered up with a biscuit in his teeth. "She's listening again. Maybe the wind'll mind its manners." And as if the wind said, "I can try," it picked up and flicked the biscuit out of his fingers. By midday, swift, ragged clouds raced across the sky, unlike the heavy summer ones that linger for rain. The swells lengthened, shouldering the hull in arrhythmic shoves. On the horizon, a smear of white crawled where no white should be. Foam breaking, but too far offshore for an honest reef, unless there was rock with hunger in it. Elara leaned her forearms on the rail, letting the spray salt her skin, and listened harder. There it was, a hiss under the wind's slap, a brittle whisper that wasn't wave against hull or line in block. She put 2 fingers to the wood, feeling for the pull. The current had its own idea today. It slid them west in small, stubborn shoves, even as the sails urged east. She crossed to the chart table near the quarterdeck and set a stone on the map to keep it from lifting. Her measurements were small and quick. A pencil ticked where she thought danger lay. Not as a certainty. That luxury belonged to gods and liars. But as a warning worth buying. Rhys came down from the foredeck with the look he wore when he had tried something with muscle and it had agreed to halfway. His hair had blown into disobedience and stayed there, ignoring rank. He braced beside her, one hand on the table, the other on the rail. Always 2 points of contact, as if he didn't entirely trust the world to leave him upright. "What do you see?" he asked. "Not see," she said. "Here." She tapped the map at a patch of blue that had never been honest. "There's rock under that water, and the current is set west. If the wind goes how I think it will, we'll be pushed into teeth." Old Shan swore softly. "Ha! Teeth I don't know? Oh, that's an insult." "Do you want soundings?" Rhys asked her, already turning to Bello for a lead line. Elara glanced at the froth crawling on the horizon, then at the sky. The fast clouds had begun knitting into a darker cloth. "No time. Better to give those teeth a wide berth." She pointed. "Bear north by northeast for a watch. Ride the edge of the set. Then we can fall back east when the wind and current argue themselves tired." Rhys didn't hesitate. "North by northeast," he called. "Reef the mainsail to first. Lash what's foolish to leave loose." The sea serpent changed the shape of herself for weather like a sensible creature dressing for a fight. Men took to the rigging, hands quick, bodies finding the right angles before thought. The sail came down to a smaller temper, snug and strong. The headsail was changed for a storm jib. Hatches hammered shut, barrels lashed. The galley's swinging stove tied so Miri wouldn't murder the sea with a pan. Elara moved with the flow, securing the chart, tying off a slack line that could have become a whip. Accepting a coil from a boy whose mouth set in the fierce line of someone 15 and furious to be useful. The light went greenish, a sick color, and the first hard drops slapped the deck like thrown stones. The wind didn't come in politely. It arrived like a guest with a grievance and shoved. "Hold her, Shan," Rhys said, low and even. "I'd like to see her try another way," Shan muttered, grinning. Then the wave hit. Green water came over the bow, the kind that had weight, not dress-up spray. The sea serpent took it and shouldered up again. But the next breath wasn't right, and the next after that was worse, a hitch in her chest. The storm lived all at once now, rain slashing sideways, horizon gone behind curtains, deck tilted and tilting more. The sound became a single enormous thing. Wind, water, wood, and line, all speaking at once. Elara anchored herself at the quarterdeck rail and spread her stance, one hand on the map table, the other checking the angle of the compass card that quivered like a bright, panicked bird. North by northeast held, barely. The current's sly hand still pushed west, the way an old habit shoved a man even when he meant to change. "Captain!" A voice knifed through the noise. One of the mirror siblings. Tamsin, maybe? Pointed dead ahead where the water went odd. A patch the wrong color, pale under pale thunder. Breakers. On a day like this, you could smell them only when it was too late. Elara didn't think. "Port!" she shouted. 2 points, now, now! "Port 2!" Rhys echoed, already hauling the wheel with old Shan, their shoulders braced like a prayer. The sea serpent protested, her bow yawning as the wind caught stubbornly at the shoulder. But then she obeyed, heeling harder, spray knifing, foam hissing where Elara had not wanted to hear foam. A line snapped somewhere with a sound like a bone breaking. Rook swore tearfully and went hand over hand into rain to catch it. The reef presented itself a heartbeat too late, and exactly on time. Dark water shouldering up to spit white, then flatten as if it had swallowed its laugh. The ship slid by it close enough for Elara to see the smear of green stone beneath, slick and hateful. She felt her stomach drop into her ankles and then rise again when they were past. "Again!" she called, voice ragged. "Keep her high! Don't let the wind bully her down! There's a second set to leeward!" Rhys didn't ask how she knew. He didn't argue with the sky. "Hi," he said to the wheel. "We dance on the edge, lads." The next hour made minutes irrelevant. They moved because movement was the only language the storm understood. The crew became parts of a single animal: hand, foot, muscle, breath. No one asking favors of gravity. Everyone obeying the code posted by the galley door, the way they'd obeyed a heartbeat. Elara lost the feeling in her fingers and then got it back in painful stabs. Her hair pasted to her skull, her clothes a second skin that weighed too much. Between shoves, her mind did small math, tiny triangulations between wind and wave and the unwanted nudge of the westward set. She felt the changes in her teeth, in the bones of her ears. Lesh, who had a talent for being exactly where he shouldn't, stumbled near the rail with a coil festooned around his neck like an accusation. A wall of water came for him, testing the ship's new braid of luck and skill. Elara lunged and caught his belt with both hands, bracing her heel against a cleat. She was not strong enough to be doing this, which meant she did it anyway. Another pair of hands grabbed Lesh's collar. Rook, grinning like a mad saint, and the three of them ended up in a pile that smelled like wet rope and regret. "Saved by the attic mouse," Rook panted, spitting rain. "Tell no one." Lesh coughed brine and managed a nod that promised both gratitude and silence. The world narrowed to the next command. "Strike the topsail!" "Strike!" "East the sheet!" "Hold! Hold! Now! Hard over!" "Hard over!" "Belay that line!" "Belay!" The second stretch of breakers ghosted out of the storm to starboard this time, the hidden teeth of some dead volcano's grin. Elara's chest went tight and bright. She found herself counting heartbeats without meaning to. 3 between each thump of the hull. "Starboard 1! Don't give up the wind! If you fall away, she'll take you!" "Starboard 1!" Rhys returned, and the wheel moved in a way that made sense to a watching ship. He moved with ruthless precision, all indulgence stripped, nothing left but the exact muscle necessary. A wave came for them that looked like a hill taking offense. The bow climbed it, hung a breath too long at the top, then slid down its far side into a valley where the sky was too high and the world too wide. Old Shan laughed like a cracked bell and kept them true. Then, as quickly as a drunk changing his mind, the worst of it blew past. Not gone. Storms are greedy and never leave without a parting shot. But the sharpest teeth had taken their bite and were finished. The rain slackened to a load a man could carry. The wind lost its rage and remembered it had other errands. The sea kept its long shoulders, but the shoves gentled. The crew did the inventory every ship does after a fight. Hands, heads, lines, sails, hull. Rook counted fingers on both hands and looked almost sad to find them all present. Miri, holding a ladle, warned that anyone who slipped on her floor would be given raw dough. Kit, the boy with the fierce mouth, sat down all at once and discovered his legs had been made of soup for the past hour. Elara discovered she was shaking only when she tried to cap the ink and couldn't make the world hold still around the little brass lid. She set the bottle aside, flexed her numb hands, and walked herself to the captain's cabin because, if she sat, the deck might decide she belonged there. Inside, the windows had been latched tight, fogged with their breath. The chart table had acquired an extra strap across its middle, as if Rhys had looked at the storm once and decided to be clever before clever was necessary. He came in a moment after she did, water streaming from him as if the sea couldn't quite decide to let him go. "You kept us off a lee shore that wasn't supposed to exist," he said, voice even, not congratulating so much as naming a weather fact. He took the towel from the peg and raked it once through his hair. "I'll make note to insult old Shan later about his teeth." "You can insult me now," Shan called cheerfully from the doorway, and then left them to it. Elara braced her hands on the table to stop them rattling. Now that the loud had gone quiet, her body wanted to register all at once what it had postponed. "It was close," she said, which both understated and honored it. Rhys leaned against the sill, towel over his shoulders, breathing in that controlled way he used when he'd fought longer than anyone else. His rope burn scars stood up pale against wet skin. For a while, they only listened to the post-storm ship, the soft slap of small waves, the creak and sigh of lines resetting, the thud of a barrel being convinced to sit down. "Thank you," he said finally. Elara's head came up. She had expected praise turned into humor, respect shaped into orders. Thank you was different. "It's my work." "You saved the ship," he said, not letting her tuck it into modesty. "And you saved me the telling I've been avoiding." She waited. She had learned that trick in Windmere's shop. Silence was the coin that bought truth at the best rate. He stood a little straighter, as if a weight on his back had finally declared itself. "The Siren's waters. I was there once. Not to land, not to... I wasn't captain then. I was a deckhand with a belt knife and a temper that thought it could be a mast." The corner of his mouth twitched like he might smile at the boy he'd been, and then decided against it. "We had a woman aboard. My sister, Mira." Elara swallowed carefully. He'd said sister the way some men said oath. "She loved the sea, the way some folk love the idea of themselves. Real deep, foolish in places. She sang to the wind, and the wind sometimes sang back." He looked at his hands like they remembered that voice. "We skirted the Siren's line because our captain had agreed he'd named Courage. The water went wrong, light like silver under silver. The sound of..." He stopped, the words refusing to be obedient. "We lost the longboat in a squall. Mira was in it. We found wreckage, but we didn't find her." Elara felt the ship lean very gently, as if she had shifted toward him without moving. "I'm sorry," she said, because there wasn't a better human sentence. He nodded once, accepting the offering without pretending it fixed anything. "Men tell stories, sailors more than most. Some swore they've seen faces on those cliffs, not dead, but not alive. Something held between. Some swear the sirens keep what they call." He couldn't help the muscle in his jaw. It kept wanting to be a fist. "I mean to know. If she's dead, I'll put a stone on that grave. If she's not—" He looked up at Elara, and for a heartbeat the captain was a brother with salt in his lashes, and a promise he'd made himself so often it had become a bone. "If she's not, then I'll bring what I can carry home." Elara thought of the tender way he'd strapped the map table before the storm, how he used strength as a tool and not a theater. She thought of the way his voice had changed when he'd said thank you. "We'll need better charts," she said, which was another way of saying I will help you, without the indecency of saying it outright. "The currents near that kind of stone make no sense in weather, and less in a calm. But they repeat. We can catch the repetitions and thread them." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't had edges. "You make impossible things sound like arithmetic." "Arithmetic can be impossible," she pointed out, "especially when someone else is holding the slate and won't show you the sums." He looked at her then with something unguarded in his gaze. Not the heat men sometimes mistook for interest, but the steadier warmth of recognition. "You were right to draw 3 routes on that star map," he said. "I took the middle for pride's sake. In weather like this, I'd have taken your cautious one and thanked you for the scolding." "You're welcome for the scolding," Elara said primly, and that earned her the copy of a smile she would admit later to keeping. A rap at the door brought them back to the ordinary. Rook struck his head in without waiting, because privacy was a land luxury. "Cook says if you don't eat, she'll mutiny, and we've no appetite for 2 storms in one day." "Tell Mary we live to obey," Rhys said, already pushing off the sill. Rook's gaze snagged on Elara, ran a quick check over her shoulders and hands as if confirming all her pieces were attached, then flicked away. Respect by not looking, the best kind on a ship. When they stepped back into the gray-washed light, the crew's noise had regained laughter's note. Kit and Tamsin had both acquired bruises they wore like medals. Lesh kept well to the far side of the deck with the rigid humility of a man who had been dragged from a god's joke and wasn't sure which god owed whom now. Old Shan's grin had deepened his face until he looked carved from rope. Miri thrust bowls into their hands with the efficiency of a queen with a ladle. "Eat," she ordered. "Storms take salt out of you and leave foolishness." Elara cradled the stew and felt heat find places wind had emptied. She caught the captain's eye over the rim of her bowl. He lifted his in a small salute that said, "We lived," and "We'll go on," and "The telling is told." Later, when the watch changed and the sky let a bolt of clean light rip a hole in the clouds, Elara stood at the rail and watched pale sun step through. The world smelled scrubbed and dangerous in a manageable way, like a room after a fight when the chairs are upright again and no one mentions who threw the first punch. Rook eased in beside her, less swagger than usual. "You put us round the teeth," he said, which might have been apology for his teasing, or might have been inventory. "That sound, how'd you know it weren't just wind?" Elara considered. "Wind shouts," she said. "Stone whispers. If you learn the difference, your maps stop lying." He made a thoughtful sound and picked something from between his teeth. "When we reach your Silver Island, scholar, if it sings, You tell me if it's a hymn or a dirge." "I'll ask the waves," she said. "And if they joke instead?" "Then I'll laugh and turn the ship." Rook nodded as if that settled a useful thing. "Good," he said. "I've no wish to die famous." She smiled despite the ache in her bones. The sea serpent breathed under her, a ship that had learned her new voice in weather and decided to keep it. Forward, the bow cut the sea with a cleaner line. Astern, the storm built itself a dark palace and sulked about being left behind. In the captain's cabin, there would be a damp towel and a chart drying, and a man who had, for the first time, traded a secret for a mapmaker's silence and found the rate fair. On deck, there would be more work than rest, and a code on a galley door that made a small, stubborn kind of civilization hold. Elara pressed her palm to the rail, to the living wood that had become her second page. "We'll draw this, you and I," she told the ship. And the ship, smug as a cat, purred. Chapter 4. Whispers and Mutiny. The sea had a way of pretending peace. 2 days after the storm, the sea serpent slid over a glassy blue so calm it could have been painted. The sails were full, the deck was dry, and the only sound was the ship's own low murmur. The creak of wood, the lazy slap of water along the hull. Even the crew seemed lighter. Rook hummed while splicing a line. Miri shooed loafers from her galley with a spoon instead of a knife. Kit and Tamsin lounged on a coil of rope, tossing dice that clattered like small bones. Elara had been given the captain's cabin for an hour that morning to work uninterrupted, which, in ship's terms, meant no more than 3 interruptions. She was sketching the new hazard, the hidden teeth they'd skirted in the storm, when the first one came. The door swung open without a knock. Lesh leaned in, not close enough to be bold, but enough that his shadow touched her paper. "Scholar," he said, drawing the word out. "Rook says you saved us in the blow. That true?" Elara kept her eyes on the chart. "I advised a change of course." "That's not what I asked." His voice had the lazy curl of a man bored enough to pick at trouble. "Storms come and go. Captain doesn't need a land-born pointer." She dipped her quill again. "Neither do you." His chuckle was low. "We'll see if the sirens agree." She heard the door shut and didn't lift her head until the ink was dry. She'd grown up with that tone. Men who didn't care if you were right, only if you were theirs to listen to. But on a ship, mutterings like that had a current. They could run under the hull and catch you in the dark. By afternoon, the wind shifted, not in the sails, but in the crew. Voices dipped when she passed. Rook, who was sharp enough to smell rot before it touched the keel, caught her wrist as she went by with her compass. "They're talking," he said without ceremony. "Not all of 'em, but enough." "Talking about what?" "Luck, curses, women aboard." His mouth tightened. "The sirens' waters make folk foolish before they even see 'em." Elara had read enough sailors' tales to know what he meant. It wasn't about her. Not really. It was about something to point to if the voyage went sour. Something, or someone, Blaine could fit around. "Does the captain know?" she asked. "He will." Rook's gaze slid past her to the quarterdeck, where Rhys stood with old Shan, discussing the next watch.
Best he hears it from me.
That night the air felt heavy, though the wind was steady. Lanterns swayed in their hooks as the sea serpent cut through the dark. Elara was stowing her tools when the shouting began. She stepped out onto the deck to find a knot of crew near the foremast, their voices low but heated. Lesh stood in the center, arms folded.
And I'm telling you, she's bad luck. We had storms the first week she came aboard. Now we're running straight into Siren's jaw with a—
That's enough. Rhys's voice sliced the night clean in two. The crowd thinned instantly. The captain stepped into the lantern light, coat unbuttoned, hair in disarray from the wind. His eyes went over each man like a net, catching what they meant to hide.
Speak plain,
he said to Lesh.
She's a landborn,
Lesh said, jerking his chin at Elara.
The sirens don't take kindly to women who've never paid their due to the sea. Every man here knows it.
She saved this ship in the blow. Rhys's tone didn't rise, but the weight in it pressed against every rib in hearing. She charts us where no map goes. You want to face the Reach blind?
It's not charts that mattered there,
Lesh muttered.
It's the sirens choosing.
A shift in the wind caught the sails, snapping them taut. Rhys stepped closer until they were face to face. Not with heat, but with a stillness that was worse. The only choosing on this ship is mine. If that doesn't suit you, there's a dinghy aft. Tide's running south. You might make land before your luck runs out. Lesh swallowed hard and looked away. Back to your posts, Rhys ordered, and the crew scattered like gulls at a thrown stone. Later, Elara found him alone by the wheel, the stars bright above them. You didn't have to.
Yes, I did.
He glanced at her, expression unreadable.
You don't argue superstition with sailors. You replace it with something heavier.
And what's heavier than superstition?
Command,
he said simply. The answer settled between them with the weight of truth. She realized suddenly that defending her had cost him something, just as the storm had, just as every decision at sea did. From the shadows near the main mast, Rook's voice drifted, pitched low enough for only her to hear.
That was the easy mutiny, he said. Pray you don't see the hard kind.
Elara looked back at the captain, his silhouette etched against the night. She'd stepped aboard the sea serpent to make maps, but now she understood. She was drawing herself into waters where survival wasn't just about reefs and currents. It was about people, and people could be far more treacherous. Chapter 5. The Siren's Waters. By the time the charts said they were close, the sea had already begun to change. It wasn't a sudden thing. No wall of fog, no single dramatic sign. Just small shifts, easy to miss if you didn't know how to listen. The swell grew smoother, almost deliberate. The air felt heavier on the skin. Warm one moment, cool the next, as though someone unseen were breathing just over your shoulder. And the color. Elara had no name for it. Not blue, not green. Silver lay in it somewhere, but not the dull kind of coins. This was the sheen of fish scales in sunlight, the glint on a blade's edge, the shimmer of heat above stone. By mid-morning, the wind had slowed, but the sea serpent moved faster. The current had taken her. Old Shan frowned at the wheel as though it had begun a conversation with someone he couldn't hear.
"They've got their hand on her keel already," he muttered.
Rook leaned on the rail, watching the water as it streamed past.
"Feels like the river back home when the salmon ran. Fast without trying."
Elara heard it too. Not in the wood this time, but in her bones. A hum pitched too low for the ear, steady as a heartbeat. She leaned over the starboard side, sketching quick notes on the curve of the current. The sound grew a little louder when she bent close to the water. And under it, just barely, music. Not notes she could hum, but something that felt like the memory of a song she'd once known. She looked toward the bow and found Rhys there, one hand on the forestay, staring into the silver horizon. He wore no coat, just a loose shirt rolled to the elbows, salt glinting on his skin. His expression was not wonder, not fear. Something in between pulled taut. When she joined him, he didn't look away.
"You hear it?"
"Yes," she said, keeping her voice low.
"It'll get louder."
"What is it?"
"The sirens, if you believe the stories."
His mouth twisted, though not in mockery.
"If you don't, it's just the water. Pick whichever helps you steer straight."
By midday, the island began to show itself. At first, it was only the shape of a cloud that didn't move with the others. Then the outline of high cliffs, dark and jagged, shouldering up from the sea as though the earth had thrust a fist through the surface. Green clung to their tops, spilling down in places like a blanket too small for the bed. Waterfalls spilled white threads into the silver sea, vanishing into mist before they reached the rocks. Between the cliffs were pale slivers of beach, scattered like promises you had to bleed to reach. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, flowers she couldn't name, and underneath that, the salt carried a sharper tang, almost metallic. The crew grew quiet. Even those who had scoffed at the siren's curse stopped their work to stare. Kit gripped the rail, knuckles white. Tamsin's gaze was locked on the shore, pupils wide as if trying to drink it all in at once. Lesh muttered a prayer, or maybe a curse. It was hard to tell which. Rook came to stand beside Elara, his voice low.
"Beautiful, isn't it?"
"Yes."
"Dangerous, too. That's the trick of it."
The current tightened its grip, pulling them toward a narrow mouth between two cliffs. The water there churned strangely, not breaking like a normal tide, but folding in on itself, spiraling down in lazy swirls. Alara's fingers twitched for her quill. She'd never seen a pattern like that.
"Drop half sail," Rhys ordered. "We go in easy."
The sea serpent slowed, but not enough for Alara's liking. She moved closer to the captain. "That pull's stronger than it looks. If we keep straight, we'll be inside before we've mapped the way back out."
"I know,"
he said quietly. "Do you?" She kept her voice level. "Because the way back could be harder. If the wind turns, we'll be at the mercy of that current." Something flickered in his gaze. Not anger, but recognition.
"You're right. We'll hold outside until we've read the tide."
He barked new orders, and the crew leaped to them. Lines strained as the sails were trimmed, and slowly the ship eased sideways, keeping the cliffs in view but out of the worst of the pull. From here, the waterfalls looked close enough to touch, though she knew they were still a long row away. The music was louder now. Elara felt it thrumming against her ribs, steady and slow. It should have been soothing. Instead, it made her fingers ache with the urge to move, to reach for something she couldn't name. She saw it on the others, too. Kit leaning forward, eyes half closed. Tamsin's lips moving like he was answering some silent question. Even Rook's usual humor had gone still, his face unreadable. Then she looked at Rhys. His jaw was tight, shoulders drawn as if the sound pulled at him more than the current did. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked like he might move without deciding to, like a man listening for a voice he feared and craved in equal measure. Without thinking, she stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve. "Captain." His eyes snapped to hers. For a heartbeat, the sound faded. Then he blinked and it came rushing back. "We'll anchor here for the night," he said, voice low but steady. "Tomorrow, we go in." That night, anchored in the strange silver calm, the sea serpent felt like a different ship. The usual small noises of life aboard, the banter, the thud of boots, the mutter of cards, were muted. The crew spoke softly, as though afraid to wake something. Elara spread her charts in the captain's cabin, sketching the cliff shapes and the swirling water at the entrance. She didn't look up when he came in, but she felt him in the space, like the way the air shifted before a squall. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Won't," he said. "Dreams here aren't safe." She risked a glance at him. The lantern light carved sharp edges into his face, shadow in the hollows of his eyes. "Do you think she's here?" she asked softly. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, "I think if she is, it's not the same as when I knew her." There was nothing to say to that, so she didn't try. Instead, she drew the current lines a little darker, marking possible escape routes if the pull grew too strong. Rhys stepped closer, leaning on the table beside her. His hand rested near hers, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat. "You're still here," he said. "Where else would I be?" His mouth quirked, but the look in his eyes wasn't teasing. "Most people turn back before the reach. You're not even tied to this voyage, scholar. Not like the rest." She kept her gaze on the map. "Maybe I just want to see if the sea's telling the truth. Or maybe you want to see what it takes from me." That made her look up. The space between them was small, the kind where breath seemed too loud. Outside, the low hum of the sirens pressed against the hull. Inside, the lantern flame swayed with the ship's slow drift. He straightened first, breaking the moment. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will ask more of us than today." When he was gone, Elara traced one fingertip over the drawn mouth of the cliffs. Her pulse was still too fast, but she told herself it was only the current, only the pull. Chapter 6. The Isle of Sirens. At dawn, the water shone like molten silver. No wind stirred the sails, yet the sea serpent drifted forward as though some unseen hand guided her. The air was warm, thick with a scent Elara couldn't name. Sweet at first breath, then sharp enough to sting the back of her throat. Her skin prickled before her mind could decide if it was from the excitement or unease. The cliffs ahead rose black against the morning light, their jagged crowns shrouded in mist. Waterfalls gleamed like ribbons, scattering into spray before they touched the sea. And all around, the music. No longer faint, but woven into every sound. The lap of water on the hull became a rhythm. The hum of the rigging, a harmony. It wasn't loud, but it filled the mind, settling behind the eyes like a dream you couldn't shake. "Hands to your stations," Rhys ordered quietly, as though raising his voice might break something fragile, or provoke it. The crew obeyed without their usual banter. Even Rook, who never could resist a quip, moved with clipped efficiency. Old Shan kept the wheel steady, though Elara saw the tremor in his hands. They passed between the cliffs. The temperature dropped like a held breath released. Inside, the sea lay unnaturally smooth, a mirror that reflected the high stone walls and the strange light spilling from the mist. The air was so still that the sound of their own breathing seemed intrusive. Elara leaned over the rail, sketching the pattern of the swirls below. The water shifted in slow spirals, pulling them deeper. The currents here didn't behave like any tide she knew. They wound around each other, never clashing, yet always moving. It was beautiful. Wrong, but beautiful. She glanced toward the bow and froze. A small boat drifted from behind a jut of cliff. In it sat a woman. Her hair spilled loose down her back, dark as wet stone. Her skin held the same strange shimmer as the water, her eyes bright and unblinking as she watched them approach. She didn't move, didn't speak. But the music deepened, each note twining around Elara's ribs. She heard Rhys swear under his breath. The woman's gaze locked on him, and for the first time, Elara saw his composure crack. His hand gripped the rail hard enough to blanch the knuckles. "Mira," he said. Elara's pulse jumped. His sister. At the sound of her name, the woman tilted her head. Slowly, she stood, her balance perfect despite the rocking boat. When she spoke, her voice was low, melodic, carrying the same cadence as the song that filled the air. "Rhys." It was a greeting and a summons in one. He stepped forward, his face caught between relief and something sharper. "You're alive." "I am." Her lips curved, though the smile didn't touch her face. "Come to me." The pull in her voice was physical. Elara felt it in her knees, her chest, the part of her that wanted to lean closer without thinking why. Around her, the crew shifted forward as if drawn by invisible lines. "Hold your course," Rhys barked, the sudden steel in his tone cutting through the haze. "Hands on the lines, now!" The spell broke, but only just. The crew staggered back to their duties, some shaking their heads as though waking from a dream. Elara clutched the rail, heart hammering. "What happened to you?" Rhys demanded, his voice raw. Mira's gaze drifted past him toward the cliffs. "The island keeps what it calls. It gives, and it takes." "You can come with us," he said. "I can bring you home." Her eyes softened for a moment. "Rhys, if I leave, I lose what I am now."
and I am not who I was.
She touched the water with her fingertips.
This place is part of me. It will not let me go.
The current shifted beneath the sea serpent. A subtle but insistent tug toward the shore. The music rose, sweet and urgent. Elara stepped forward. If we don't turn now, we won't have the tide to get out. Rhys didn't look away from his sister. Mira!
Go,
she said softly.
Before the island decides to keep you too.
For a moment, no one moved. Then Rhys's jaw tightened. He turned sharply. Shan, helm to starboard. Rook, trim the headsail. We're leaving. The crew scrambled to obey. The sea serpent swung wide, fighting the pull. Elara felt the current clutch at the hull, reluctant to release them. The music rose again, sharper now, a longing that cut like glass. Rhys stood at the bow until the cliffs began to close behind them. Mira's small boat growing smaller in the silver light. Only when the current slackened and the music faded did he turn away. That night, anchored well outside the reach, the air felt thin and empty without the song. The crew moved quietly, their earlier tension replaced by something more fragile, like the aftermath of grief. Elara found Rhys alone on the quarterdeck, staring back toward the dark line of the cliffs. She hesitated, then joined him. You did the right thing, she said. He didn't look at her. I left her there. She told you to go. His hands tightened on the rail. She didn't ask me to stay. Elara had no answer for that, so she stood beside him, letting the silence settle between them. Not empty, but steady. The wind stirred, carrying the faintest trace of that strange, sweet scent from the reach. She thought she felt the pull again, light as a thread. And she thought, not for the first time, that some things the sea took, it never gave back. Chapter 7. The Island Does Not Let Go. The sea serpent should have been free. They'd passed the cliffs. The wind had returned, steady and cold, tugging them toward open sea. The strange silver sheen of the reach's water had begun to fade into honest blue. But the current hadn't released them. Elara felt it in the deck first, a faint drag under her boots, as though the sea clung to the hull. When she leaned over the starboard rail, the water was still turning. Not the chaotic chop of open water, but the slow, deliberate spiral she'd mapped inside the cliffs. We're still in it, she murmured. Rook, tightening a line nearby, followed her gaze. That's not possible. It is, she said. And it's getting stronger. Before he could answer, the music began again. It wasn't the faint hum of before. This was sharper, urgent, curling under the skin. It filled the space between heartbeats, turning the air thick. The crew faltered in their work. Kit's hands slackened on the coil of rope. Tamsin drifted toward the rail, eyes unfocused. Even old Shan's grip on the wheel loosened. Elara's own pulse slowed to match the rhythm of the song. The water below seemed brighter, clearer, as if beckoning her to lean just a little further. Hands to the lines! Rhys's voice cracked through the haze like a whip. "Eyes on your work, now!" Some of the crew jerked back into motion, but others hesitated, swaying as though in a trance. The current pulled harder, slewing the bow toward the reach. Rhys crossed the deck in 3 long strides, seizing the wheel himself. "Shan, take the port anchor. Be ready to drop it on my mark." Elara forced her gaze from the water to the chart table. The map she'd drawn of the entrance lay there, edges curling in the damp. She traced the swirl of currents with her fingertip, recalling how they twisted, how they met. If the song was pulling them back, it was using those spirals. She ran to the captain's side. "If we keep fighting the current head-on, we'll lose. We need to use it." Rhys's eyes flicked to her. "Explain." "Let it pull us sideways, just enough to catch the countercurrent here." She tapped the map. "Then cut hard to port. It should sling us out past the strongest pull." "You sure?" "Yes." She didn't let herself add, "enough." For one heartbeat, he studied her as though weighing the risk, the crew, his ship. Then he nodded once. "Rook, ease the main, just enough to drift her into her pull." The deck tilted as the sea serpent surrendered to the spiral, the bow swinging toward the reach. The song swelled, sweet and coaxing, as if sensing their return. A shiver ran up Elara's spine. "Now!" Rhys roared. Shan dropped the port anchor. The chain rattled, groaned, then caught with a jolt that shook the deck. The ship's bow swung hard to port, the stern whipping around. The countercurrent caught them like a giant's shove, hurling them sideways. The cliffs loomed briefly to starboard, close enough for Elara to see the pale shapes in the water below. Shapes that might have been rocks, or might have been something else entirely. The anchor dragged, scraping along the seabed before biting. The sea serpent shuddered, then surged forward, the current now pushing them from behind instead of dragging from ahead. The music faltered, and then it stopped. Only the rush of wind and the groan of timbers remained. The silver faded from the water. The pool under the hull eased until it was nothing more than an honest tide. They were free. For a while, no one spoke. The crew moved as if afraid to break the spell, securing the anchor, trimming the sails, adjusting the course. When Rook passed Elara at the rail, he gave her a nod that was small but solid. Shan's grin showed more teeth than she'd ever seen. Rhys stayed at the wheel until the cliffs were a dark smudge behind them. Only then did he step back, rolling the tension from his shoulders. "You trusted me," Elara said quietly when they were alone. "I did," he agreed, not looking at her. "And?" "And I was right." He finally met her gaze. "You were too." The words shouldn't have mattered so much, but they warmed her like sun after cold water. She saw in his face not just respect for her skill, but the recognition that it was now part of the ship's survival, as essential as wind or sail. "We'll log it," he said, "in case we ever need to get out again." Elara hesitated. "Do you think you will?" His mouth curved, but without humor. "The sea doesn't let go forever. One day, it might call me back. But next time," his eyes held hers, "I'll have a map." Chapter 8. Currents We Can't Chart. The reach was behind them, but it didn't feel gone. For 2 days, the sea stayed unnaturally calm. The wind was good, the sky a pale blue rinse. but the crew moved with the careful quiet of people afraid to wake something. Work was done, lines were coiled, decks scrubbed, but the usual laughter, the shouted jokes between masts, the clatter of dice on the deck, all of it was missing. It wasn't just the crew. The sea serpent herself felt different beneath Elara's boots. She no longer had the restless sway of a ship eager to run. Instead, she moved steady, almost subdued, like a heartbeat slowed. At first, the men and women who passed Elara on deck gave her nods, sometimes even a murmured word of thanks. After all, she had helped pull them free. Rook clapped her on the shoulder with a grin. Kit brought her an extra ration from the galley. "For saving my hide." And Shan insisted she take his favorite seat near the stern when she came topside at night. But not all were convinced. She heard it in the whispers below deck. The same voices that had doubted her before, now claiming the sirens had spared them only because she'd promised something in return, that she had spoken to them in some way they couldn't hear. Lesh's voice carried loudest, his tone less accusatory now and more wary. That wariness was worse than open challenge. Fear spread faster when it hid behind lowered voices. On the third evening, Elara took her charts to the quarterdeck. The sun was bleeding down into the sea, painting the water in bands of gold and shadow. She worked in the last of the light, refining the map of the reach, marking the countercurrent that had saved them. She sketched the cliffs from memory, the shimmer of the water, the way the song seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You kept them alive," Rhys said behind her. She didn't turn immediately. "So did you." His boots sounded against the deck as he came closer. "Not the same way. They expect me to keep them alive. You? Well, they weren't sure about you." "I've noticed," she said dryly. He leaned one elbow on the railing beside her. "Some of them will keep doubting. That's the nature of crews. But the rest? They've started to believe you belong here." Elara glanced up at him. "And you?" His gaze was steady, unreadable in the half-light. "I stopped deciding that the moment you put us in the countercurrent." That startled a smile from her. "So I've earned my place?" "You've earned the right to keep proving it." His tone was calm, but there was a thread in it. Something more personal. Something not entirely about survival. A gust lifted a strand of her hair into his face. Without thinking, he caught it, tucking it behind her ear. The gesture was small, but in the quiet between them it felt sharp as a change in the wind. Elara's pulse stuttered. She forced her attention back to the chart. "I'll need more ink before I can finish this." "I'll have Rock find you some in the stores," he said. But his voice had lowered, and the space between them hadn't shifted. She could feel the heat of him, the steadiness of his presence like the ship's own timbers. Below, the crew's voices began to rise again. Faint laughter, the sound of a fiddle somewhere aft. Life returning, slow as the tide. She closed her chart and rolled it away. "You think the reach is done with us?" His eyes stayed on the horizon. "No, the sea doesn't forget, and neither do I." It wasn't an answer she could map, but something in her, something that had nothing to do with ink or compass, understood exactly what he meant. Chapter 9. Teeth in the Water. The Reach was a shadow in the horizon when the lookout called down from the foremast.
"Sail port side! 3 points off the bow!"
Rhys was on the quarterdeck in an instant, spyglass to his eye. Elara, drawn by the edge in his voice, joined him. Through the glass, the ship on the horizon cut a clean, predatory line across the water. Sleek hull, black sails, a prow carved in the shape of a serpent's open jaw. She didn't need a chart to know trouble when she saw it. "They're closing fast."
"Fast enough to mean they've been waiting," Rhys said grimly. "Privateers, most likely, or worse."
Elara frowned. "Worse than privateers?" His mouth curved without humor.
"Privateers are at least paid to attack you. These may just enjoy it."
Already the black-sailed ship was angling to intercept. The sea serpent was swift, but the other vessel's line spoke of speed built for the hunt. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Rhys lowered the glass.
"Keep us ahead of them."
She blinked. "Ahead? I'm not a helmsman."
"No," he said, "but you know the currents. You read them faster than anyone on this deck. Find me a path that gives us every scrap of speed."
Within minutes, the deck was alive with movement. Rook and Shan hauled on the sheets, trimming sails for speed. Kit ran lines to the foremast. The sea serpent leapt forward under the sudden full-bellied pull of wind. Elara knelt at the chart table, compass swinging gently as she marked their position. She traced a finger along the edge of a shaded bank, eyes narrowing. "There's a shallow ridge here, 3 cables off our current course. The wind over it runs faster because of the temperature shift in the water." Rhys was at her shoulder.
"Will it give us enough?"
"If we hit it exactly, miss, and we'll drag the keel." His eyes held hers for half a beat.
"Show me."
She pointed to the line. "Here."
"Shan," Rhys barked, already moving. "Adjust 2 points to port. Steady into her."
The deck tilted as the sea serpent leaned into the change. The pursuing ship mirrored the move, but they were a beat too slow. The ridge announced itself not with a visible change in the water, but in the way the sails suddenly swelled, the wind whistling through the rigging like a fresh breath. The sea serpent surged forward, spray knifing off her bow. The black-sailed ship faltered. Even a half-second's hesitation was enough for the gap between them to widen.
"They'll try to cut across our path," Rhys said. "We can't give them a straight line."
Elara scanned the chart again, her pulse matching the thrum of the hull. "There's another ridge, narrower, steeper. If we ride the edge, they can't follow without risking a split hull." Rhys grinned, sharp as the wind.
"Let's make them choose."
The next 20 minutes blurred into ordered chaos. Rhys steered tight along the invisible ridge while Elara called corrections. "Half a point starboard. Hold the line. Now give her wind." The sea serpent danced on the edge of danger, the water beneath them so shallow in places that she could see the pale shadow of sand just under the surface. Behind them, the black-sailed ship swung wide, unwilling to follow so close to the teeth of the reef. The gap widened further, until the other vessel's silhouette shrank against the horizon. Only when it was clear they would not give chase did Rhys ease the wheel. The sails slackened into an easy pull, and the crew's breath came loud in the sudden quiet. Shan let out a bark of laughter.
"That was a fine piece of sailing."
Rook grinned at Elara.
"And fine piece of chart work."
Rhys only looked at her, a glint in his eyes.
"You didn't just keep us ahead. You kept us free."
She felt the heat of his words in her chest, not because of their praise, but because they carried no doubt, just certainty, as if her place here was no longer in question. That night, the sea was calm again, the crew's mood and laughter returning in bright bursts. Elara found herself alone on the deck, the stars sharp above. She heard Rhys before she saw him. "You read the sea like other people read faces." She smiled faintly. "And you trust me with your life now." "Not just mine," he said quietly. The weight of that settled between them, heavier than the Reach's song, steadier than the wind. She met his gaze, and for a moment it felt like they were standing on the same narrow ridge they'd sailed earlier. Danger on either side, but perfectly balanced. Neither of them looked away. Chapter 10. The Port Without a Flag. The port had no name, at least not one painted on signs or printed on charts. Sailors called it the Port Without a Flag because no nation claimed it, and no law touched it. From a distance it looked almost inviting, a crescent of pale sand, the shallows gleaming turquoise under the sun, ships rocking in the sheltered bay. But the closer the sea serpent drew, the more it revealed its true face. The wooden docks sagged with rot. The tide carried the smell of tar, brine, and too many unwashed bodies. The taverns lining the waterfront leaned together like conspirators, their shutters hanging askew. It was the kind of place where a coin could buy anything, and the price was never just a coin. Rhys stood at the rail, watching as the anchor dropped and the sails came down. "We'll be here long enough to take on fresh water, hardtack, and salt meat. No longer." "Because of the scenery?" Elara asked dryly. "Because this place has a way of swallowing what you don't chain to the deck," he said. "Men, cargo, ships. I don't intend to be one of them." The crew dispersed fast once the gangplank was down, moving in pairs or threes toward the narrow streets. Even Rook and Shan vanished into the press of bodies, muttering something about rum. Rhys assigned Kit to guard the ship while he and Elara went in search of the supply master. It wasn't long before Elara realized the danger here wasn't just the cut-purses who slipped between sailors like shadows. It was the way the port seemed to watch you. From open doorways, from darkened windows, from the stillness of people leaning in alleyways who didn't move until you'd passed. She kept pace with Rhys, scanning for the quickest way back to the docks if things turned. "You've been here before?" "Once," he said without looking at her. "Left with fewer crew than I came in with. That's how I learned." The supply master was a bald, heavy-set man with a scar down one cheek and the eyes of someone who didn't bother pretending to care about fairness. Still, the exchange went smoothly enough, until a voice cut across the dim warehouse. "Well, the prodigal captain." Elara turned to see a man stepping from the shadows between stacked barrels. He wore a long coat in faded crimson, the hem frayed and a smile that didn't match his eyes. There was something about him, his posture, the way he owned the space, that marked him as someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Varric," Rhys said flatly. "You could at least look happy to see me," the man said, strolling closer. "After all, I still consider you in my debt." Elara felt the tension shift in the air. "Friend of yours?" she asked carefully. "Not in the way that word usually means," Rhys said. Varric's smile widened. "I hear you've been making maps that don't exist, sailing places ships don't come back from. I have to wonder, what would someone pay for such knowledge?" "That knowledge isn't for sale," Rhys said. Varric's gaze slid to Elara, weighing her.
And you are?
Before she could answer, Rhys stepped between them. She's my cartographer. Varric's eyes lingered on her, a flicker of interest there that wasn't about maps.
Well, if either of you change your mind, you know where to find me. I'll even make it worth your while.
He left without waiting for a reply, his coat vanishing into the sunlight outside. Elara exhaled slowly. What was that? Varric doesn't deal in goods, Rhys said, already gathering their supplies. He deals in secrets, and he's just decided we have one he wants. They returned to the sea serpent without incident, but Elara noticed Rhys scanning the docks, his gaze lingering on every unfamiliar face. The crew was mostly back aboard, their laughter forced, eyes flicking toward the shore as though expecting someone to come down the gangplank. When the last line was cast off and the ship began to drift from the dock, Rhys stood at the stern, watching the port recede. Something tells me we haven't seen the last of him, Elara said. You're right, Rhys replied. Men like Varric don't forget, and they don't forgive. The sails filled with wind, carrying them out into open water, but the weight of the port stayed with them, like a shadow that had learned their shape. Chapter 11. The Shadow in the Wake. 2 days out from the port without a flag, the wind was steady, the sea calm enough to carry a mirror's reflection. Perfect sailing weather. Too perfect. Elara noticed it first in the ship's feel beneath her boots. The sea serpent had a rhythm she knew now, a certain way she leaned into the wind. Today she felt hesitant. Not enough to slow them by more than a whisper, but enough to set the back of Elara's neck prickling. She took her suspicions to Rhys. Something's wrong, she said quietly as they stood on the quarterdeck. He gave her a sideways glance. We've got fair wind, good speed, and calm seas. I'd call that lucky. Luck doesn't explain a ship holding just under full stride for no reason, she countered. It's like something's dragging. Rhys studied her face, then called down to Rook. Check the aft rigging and the rudder chain. Rook disappeared below. Minutes later, he returned, holding a length of hemp rope, frayed and cut clean through.
This was tied to the rudder chain, he said grimly. Weighted with something heavy. Would have kept us dragging just enough to make us easy to catch.
Elara's stomach sank. So Varric shadowed us since port.
Or got a head start and left us a gift, Rhys said. His jaw tightened. Either way, it means he knows our course. The crew worked fast to repair the line and sweep the hull for more surprises. Elara went over her charts, tracing possible routes Varric could be using. If he'd truly gotten ahead of them, there were only 3 choke points they'd have to pass before the next open stretch of sea. Rhys came to a stand over her shoulder. You're thinking he'll try to box us in?
Or funnel us where he wants us, she said. If I were him, I'd wait near the second point. It's the narrowest and hardest to bypass without losing a day's sail.
His mouth curved faintly. You're starting to think like a hunter.
I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want to be cornered. By nightfall, they reached the first choke point without incident. The crew relaxed fractionally, but not Rhys, and not Elara. She stayed on deck long after the others had gone below, watching the stars wheel overhead. It was in the small hours when she saw it, a light low on the horizon, where no friendly ship should be. It winked once, twice, then vanished, only to reappear in the same rhythm further along the waterline. Signaling. Her pulse kicked hard. She moved fast to wake Rhys, and within moments he was behind her, spyglass in hand. 2 ships, he said after a long moment. 1 dead ahead, 1 shadowing to port. He's trying to herd us. Elara pulled the chart from under her arm. We can cut northeast. Go into the shoals. That's madness, he said. We'll tear the hull out from under us. Not if we ride the same current we used to outrun the privateers, she said. We'll lose some speed, but Varric won't follow into shallow water. Rhys's gaze locked onto hers. You're sure? I'm sure enough to bet your ship. A slow smile broke the tension in his face. That's the right answer. The turn was sharp, the sails straining as the sea serpent swung northeast. The water grew paler, the sea floor just visible in flashes under the moonlight. Twice they grazed sandbars close enough to make the crew curse under their breath. But each time Elara's calls brought them back into the narrow channel of deeper water. Behind them, Varric's lights shifted, holding just outside the shoals. They followed for a while, but the gap widened with each careful mile. By dawn, the horizon behind them was empty. Rhys came to stand beside Elara at the bow, both of them watching the pale gold of morning spill across the water. You kept us from the teeth again, he said quietly. I'd like to think I've made a habit of it, she replied. He glanced down at her, a faint warmth in his expression. And I'd like to think I'm done underestimating you. Chapter 12. The map isn't finished. By the 3rd sunrise after losing Varric in the shoals, the sea serpent had settled back into her natural rhythm. The sails caught the wind clean. The timbers creaked like an old friend stretching in the sun. And the crew's voices rose in laughter again. It would have been easy to believe they were safe. Elara stood at the bow, the spray cool against her skin as she marked their position on her chart. The reach was behind them. Varric was gone, and she had maps, real ones, of waters that had been little more than whispered rumors in taverns. For the first time since she'd stepped aboard, she let herself think they might actually reach their next port without incident. Rhys joined her, his boots sounding against the deck. When we make harbor, you'll have your choice of contracts, he said. Cartographers will pay for your reach map, even if they don't believe it's real. And you? She asked. Will you? His mouth curved faintly. I've seen it. I don't need to believe. They stood in companionable silence, watching the horizon until Shan's voice carried from the rigging. Captain! Something off the starboard quarter! Rhys lifted his spyglass and Elara saw his posture change. Shoulders tightening, jaw set. What is it? She asked. He lowered his glass. A bottle, sealed, floating straight for us. The crew fished it from the water. A dark green bottle, stoppered with wax, the glass clouded with age. Inside, curled tight, was a piece of parchment. Elara broke the seal. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the lines on it were unmistakable. A chart. A stretch of coast she didn't recognize, marked with symbols in a hand she didn't know. At the center was a small spiral, nearly identical to the one she'd drawn for the Reach's currents. Beside it, scrawled in cramped letters, were 4 words. Not the only one. A chill ran through her. This handwriting, it's not yours, she said to Rhys. He shook his head. And it's not Varric's. Elara traced the spiral with her fingertip. Whoever had made this map knew the same kind of waters she did. And if the message was true, The reach was only one of many. Rhys studied her face.
You think it's a warning?
I think, she met his eyes. I think it's an invitation. Below them, the crew murmured, curiosity rippling across the deck. Above, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of something unfamiliar on the air. Rhys rolled the map carefully and handed it back to her. Then the question is, Elara, do we take it? She looked toward the horizon where sea and sky met in an unbroken line. The answer should have been simple. Instead, it twisted in her chest like the pull of a current she couldn't see. Maybe, she said softly. But first, we find out who else is charting the places ships aren't meant to go. And somewhere, far beyond the edge of the map, a dark sail waited, patient, watching. Epilogue. Far astern, just beyond the curve of the horizon, a dark sail slid into view. It didn't follow. Not yet. It simply matched the sea serpent's course, keeping its distance, patient as the tide, certain as the pull of the moon. Whoever held her wheel already knew the map Elara carried, and they weren't about to let her keep it for long. This has been The Pirate and the Mapmaker, written by Tasha Nerys, narrated by Angela Clark. Copyright 2025 by Two Chimps Studios. All rights reserved.